Alright, so now what we need to do is prep our aluminum tube for the screw. Now, right now, it'll barely slide in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be taking just a regular, can you guys see what I'm doing here? Alright, so I've got our aluminum spacer that's going to go inside the buttstock to house the screw. And the screw won't fit properly in there. It needs to be able to fit all the way through and be tight but loose. So what I'm going to do is use this drill and just kind of wallow it out a little bit inside of there. I'm just going to take my chamfing tool that I use for reloading. Alright, now it's important that even though this screw fits pretty good now, we want to wait until it cools off because it's really hot right now, because aluminum expands and contracts pretty bad when it's hot. Right now it's hot. So we need to let that cool off and then double check it to make sure that it still fits before we cut it to length. So it's cooled off now, and it fits pretty much perfectly. It's about what I wanted. You don't want it to get stuck. You want it to be able to slide in and out pretty easily. So that way, once it's set inside the stock, you won't have a hard time getting the screw out when you disassemble the gun. So I would say that that's pretty much perfect. Alright, so the next step is going to be to cut the spacer to go in there. Alright, so I know that when I stick my, when I place my trigger frame on here, I'm still setting low on the bottom side. Oh, you guys are down here. I'm all the way up here. When I stick my trigger frame on here, I'm setting low here. Alright, I want to be setting a little bit more flush. So I know I'm going to use this as a guide for my length, but I know I need to cut it just a little bit bigger, and if I need to cut it down or file it down, I can. But this is going to be, the aluminum rod is going to be my kind of, I guess, fill mark when I start filling the stock in with the fiberglass. Alright, and what that's going to do, I'm going to come up to the tip, and that's going to be my fill mark. So it's got to be perfect, And in order to do that, we're going to cut it a little bit long and then cut it down, sand it down as we go to make sure that everything fits perfectly. So I've got my rod on here. I've also got a little indentation on the bottom of the bottom side of the trigger frame. And so I need to make sure that that's another reason why I chamfered that, was so that it'll set, that rod will set inside of that little indentation. So when I put it on here and mark it, I'm going to go ahead and give it a little bit of space for the indentation. And we'll go ahead and mark it, and then I'm going to cut it a little bit longer than what my mark is to give me room to drill and file and sand on that other side. So let me just change out my Dremel here. Telling you guys, talking a little bit about gunsmithing tools. You know, you guys are tracking that I'm got accepted to that gunsmithing school starting fall of 2014, and they sent me a tool list, and it's funny. They sent me a tool list, and I'm telling you guys, I bet there's $10,000 worth of tools on there that I'm going to have. Which some of it I already have, you know, working in the construction field and everything. I've got a lot of tools. Some of it I already have, some of it I don't have, and some of it's really expensive. But anyway, and that's not equipment, that's just tools. Like if I want to buy a lathe, or you know, a belt sander, or a bandsaw, or anything like that, that's all more. So anyway, Dremel wasn't on the list, but I tell you what, guys, I mean, and like I said, I'm not a licensed or a professional gunsmith or anything by no means, but I don't know what I would do in gunsmithing without my Dremel. So anyway, let's get this cut. Let that cool off for a second. You noticed when I was cutting that, I was going around instead of just cutting straight through, and that's to make our cut a little bit more even. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is go ahead and attempt to run our drill through it to try to clean off those burrs. Alright, and then we'll run it through this side now. Chamfing tool just for a second. We just want to make sure our screw will still fit through there. It's aluminum, so it's pretty weak. Sometimes it'll tighten up on you and you won't be able to do nothing with it. Alright, so run our screw through. Oh yeah, perfect. Loving it. Alright, now we will take our file. Move this drill out of the way so you guys can watch. Take this file, file our edges off. And we've got our spacer. You can see I've got my spacer in here. Now to check to see if that's where I want it, if that's the right length that I'm looking for, I'll go ahead and just thread the screw through it. It looks like we need to trim just a little bit more off. So I've got the screw threaded through, and you can see that there's a little bit of gap. We want that to set flush, alright? If not just a little bit over flush, but you can see that we need to take a little bit more off of our post. Perfect. That's what we wanted right there. So we got the screw setting flush, got just a little bead but no thread sticking out. That's what we want. So that spacer is the perfect size right now to make everything look like it did when it came out of the factory. So our next step is to take this out first. Screw out. Double check our fitting on our now you can see where we've actually formed. I had to bend the trigger frame apart, had to separate it to get that spacer in there because it was squeezed down so tight. And now we see if we set this flush up here, that all of this down here is flush now. See how it protrudes just as much here as it does here? That means we have the perfect spacing. Alright, so that's what we want. Now the trick is to make sure, because I've already drilled out this hole here to fit the spacer. Alright, it's got a nice tight snug fit in there. But what we need to make sure now is I'm actually going to put this spacer in. It's a little bit tight for my likings. We don't want to bend our spacer because that's aluminum. If we bend it, we'll kink our screw up in it. Alright, so what I want to do, I'm going to take the next drill bit size up, and if our hole is a little bit bigger than our spacer, that's okay, because we have epoxy that we're going to put in there to help lock that spacer in. So we actually need that extra space for that epoxy to have a place to set up in, if that makes sense. So what we're going to do is take our next drill bit size, much better. Alright, so that is the process of all the fitting and cutting. So now what we have to do is actually epoxy this piece in here.